Today I'm going to warm up Act. Bob Orstig is going to share with you in a little bit, and I just got to help sort of warm the crowd up a little. And hoping for the day when I can be the star. Today's scriptures give us insight into Mark's view of the relationship between Jesus and his disciples. Mark is a book that portrays Jesus with his followers and always moving toward Jerusalem. If you read through Mark, it sounds like they're on their way. And in today's passage, there's the disciples. Jesus is trying to teach the disciples tell them about what's ahead of them, that the way ahead of them is a way of sorrow, and that he will be betrayed, and he will be crucified, he will die, but that he will rise in 3 days. And so Jesus is taking some time to talk with his disciples about this. Now, Mark is the smallest of the Gospels. Much of Mark is found in Luke and in Matthew, and it's the simplest. It's it's a bare bones. Now in the verses, the chapters preceding the verses that Will read, there was a lot going on. Jesus has dialogue with his critics and with seekers. He performs several miracles, including the feeding of the multitude. Peter, he asks, "Who am I?" And Peter says, "You're the Messiah." And he praises Peter for it. And then he turns around later when he begins telling the disciples that he's going to be crucified, he's going to be killed. Peter says, "Oh no, that's not going to happen." Look around you. Everything's going. You've got power. There are people here. That's not going to happen. And Jesus then denounces Peter, and even says, "You're like Satan. You're tempting me." And also he gave the crowd an invitation, but it was a very demanding invitation. He says, "If you're going to follow me, then I have to be central. I have to be central. And the ways that I'm teaching will be the guides for your life." And then he also, this is in these verses and these chapters right before this passage that we read, he took Peter, James, and John up on the mountain. They had this experience of being the transformation or the transfiguration, where Jesus has a conversation with Elijah and with Moses. And then he heals a boy of what sounds like seizures. And so there's a lot going on in this short time that precedes the verses that we read today. So in the verses that we read today, Scripture says that Jesus wanted to tell his followers, his disciples, he wanted to tell them about what was ahead. And so he took them out almost sort of like a retreat, is the way I envision it. And he took them away from their other people. He didn't want other people to be involved in this conversation. And he began to tell them that they were going to Jerusalem. They were going to confront the religious establishment and the Roman authorities, and that would end up with him being killed. But he would rise again. But this kind of talk frightened the disciples, you can imagine, and it probably confused them too. Here, everything seemed to be going, and there seemed to be this real high, and all around Jesus, and there seems to be this. There had to be some revolutionary fervor as they saw the things that Jesus did and heard the things he said. And then for Jesus to say, but I'm going to die. I'm going to die. It was just really confusing to them. And so I sort of picture Jesus saying, okay, let's spend some time and work this out. The TV miniseries Jesus of Nazareth, directed by Franco Zeffirelli, which appeared 44 years ago, and there are some that we probably can remember that miniseries that was on TV. It's still one of my favorite Jesus movies. There's something about the humanity of Jesus that's portrayed in that movie that just grabs me. But in one of the scenes, Jesus and the disciples are sitting around a campfire, and they're on the road and they camp. They sleep on the road, and they built this fire and they're talking. And Jesus is telling the disciples about some of these heavier thoughts, and they're asking questions. And so the campfire sort of becomes sort of a symbol for me of a place where the people of God can sort of gather informally and share with each other. And in that gathering, share significant things that come from the heart. When I was in seminary in Kansas City, I embraced the things I learned in seminary. My professors answered questions and taught me to apply Scripture and how to do it, and even sort of encouraged my curiosity and loved me through periods of doubt. They taught classes. Sometimes we met around the coffee table, during the coffee break, and that was some of my favorite times, and probably the most fruitful learning times that I had was that kind of informal contact with the professors. But it was mostly educational, intellectual, and stuff that was going on in seminary. But I attended a church, Broadway Baptist Church, where I was encouraged to sort of live it out. Seminary, I was learning things. Church, I was given the opportunity to live it out. And there were a number of seminary classmates that attended that church also. And there was an emphasis in the church, an emphasis of a value placed on people spending time together. Individuals would meet for coffee, meet for meals. There were small groups. I was in a group with 9 other people. We met for the 2.5 years that I was in that church every Sunday night. And the pastor, Paul Smith, emphasized the fact that Jesus came and created a community. He called 12 to him, and they became a sort of a community. And his intention was, the way of his plan for changing the world was to work through this community of believers. And the way that he did discipling was to spend time one-on-one and in small groups, sharing and inviting them, his followers to share. And so for me, and Paul Smith said, probably they did a lot of sharing around a campfire. So later when I saw the movie, I thought, oh, there it is. It must be, it's in the movie. And so the campfire sort of become a metaphor for me for an intimate kind of time, a relaxed time when there's potential for learning from those around me. And so in my time in Kansas City and Broadway Baptist Church, I spent a lot of time learning how to share, being encouraged to share and be honest and authentic, and even to confront. And it was really a powerful time. Paul Smith's one of his favorite sayings was that disciples grew spiritually as they lived out their lives with Jesus, armpit to armpit with each other. That's a little gross, a little crude, thank you. But what he meant was is that we will grow. He was encouraging us to give of ourselves to each other, even as we lived in the nitty-gritties of life. And that in that experience we would learn about God. Now, we have lots of ways to learn of God and nurture growth. We have the Bible and studies to help us unpack it. We have worship with music that contains Christian theology, tradition, and prayers and longing. We have sermons that are teaching times about the Scriptures. We have contemplative prayer, ways to encounter God in the stillness, and we have group prayer. But we also have each other individually in informal times. And as we share our stories that we bring to each other, we learn. We learn about not only about the people, the person who is sharing the story, but we also learn about God and faith. And in the struggles we share, we also learn about how God responds to us. This week, David and I were working on talking about the service, and I was telling him some of the thoughts some of the things I might mention. He said that when he went home sometime, he went to his home church, and there was a pastor there, and he says there are actually 5 Gospels. And he said there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then there's your life. And then most of the people you encounter will not read the first 4. But the gospel that you bring to them will be the gospel that you experience, that you are given, that they will receive. A couple of months ago or so, I realized that we at UBC have much to give each other. I've realized that all along, really. But in light of the pandemic, I was thinking, I thought, how did we survive that? What were the things that happened in our lives? Where did our faith come from? And a few months ago, I had asked Isaac to share. Tell us about your faith walk during your time of illness, and tell us, and I thought that was very helpful, Isaac, what you shared. I was eating, Pat Orbaugh and I were eating with Bob Horsig one day for lunch. That was our little campfire we were gathered around, and I asked Bob to tell me about. I wanted to know some of the things that had happened to him during his period of illness and during this period of isolation. So I decided that I wanted for him to share with you. And so today we will have this little campfire experience as and Bob's is going to come and share with us about his experience and whatever he wants to say, which is a scary thing to think about. But Bob will come and share with us. I wanted to give me one little thing that I sort of jumped over. The disciples didn't get it. They didn't understand, and I'm not sure I understand completely about Jesus' death. But they didn't get it, and they were afraid. And the sign of that was that they were arguing among themselves, and Jesus heard them arguing. And he said, and so Jesus actually probably, I think he must have had that keen kind of hearing that probably only mothers have, where they pick up on everything that's going on. And but Jesus says, what were you talking about? And then what they were talking about was who was going to be the greatest. So here Jesus is saying, I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm doing this way of sorrow and which will end up with my dying. And said, and they're arguing over who's the greatest who's the best disciple, who's number one. And so in that Jesus brings he says two things. One thing he says is that if you want to be great, you got to be the servant. You got to serve the most. And if you want to be great, and he said, and then he brought a child into the midst, and he put his arm around the child, and he said, and you have to, and this is the kind of person that you need to serve, the most vulnerable. You have to serve the most vulnerable. And Jesus said that's the criteria to use. That was one of their campfire experiences. So Bob, why don't you come share with us?
Good morning.
Morning.
My wife told me I'm supposed to tell you that she has poison ivy really bad and everything. I know there are those who think she just didn't want to hear me. In fact, I think she went to the casino on the west side and put odds on whether I can be short and brief. But I was having lunch one day with Pat and Ken, and I was talking about my experience this last 2 years with cancer, and I have prided myself my whole life on always being in control of every part. My wife swears that I don't like to fly because I'm not the pilot. And she's probably right. I probably would fly through thunderstorms if I was there. So this thing hit me. I actually went to the hospital for something else, which they fixed in a day. And the guy said, but we found this stuff. So, it was scary, and I was relating to Ken that from the time I was little, and thank goodness my grandmother raised me in the church. I had this belief that Jesus was looking out for me. I was 3 or 4 or 5 years old. I wanted to be one of those children sitting at his knee. It meant a lot to me. And every night my grandmother would make me get on my knees and pray that child's prayer, now I lay me down to sleep, every night. And that carried me through my life, through being a crazy teenager and doing all kinds of things. And it kind of faded. Then I went to Vietnam. And I found myself most nights laying in my rack, listening to the Armed Forces radio over here and saying, now I lay me down to sleep. Because from the time I can remember, it gave me a secure feeling. If I died or whatever, I was going to see Jesus. And when I came back from Vietnam, and there were a lot of adjustments to be made, it took a while. And so I hadn't really prayed for a long time. And then this came up, and I found myself being a child again. I was scared, confused, and then after I had the surgery, I got that thing that older people get from the anesthetic and stuff. And I mean, it was crazy. I couldn't grab a hold of anything and steady myself. I had to have the nurse cover the picture on the wall because I thought the animals in the picture were running around on the wall. And it just really bothered me. And so I started to withdraw. And all I wanted to do was get out of the hospital, but they couldn't get my wound to heal. I had never experienced any of this physical stuff in my life. I always healed quick. I had broken bones, I had surgeries, but this was scaring the heck out of me. And if it hadn't been for my wife and my children, they kind of were like anchors. One night, one of my sons had to stop me from totally unplugging myself because I decided I needed to go home. And it was very disoriented, and I started digging in, like my hard-headed self I can be. And I was resisting everything. All I wanted to do was go home. I was ready to write a novel after 8 weeks in the hospital entitled 6 Feet from Freedom, because it seemed like I was always 6 feet from a window, looking out, watching the seasons change. So I wanted to go home, and my wife said, no, you got to go to the nursing home for 5 weeks and learn to walk again. And I got really angry about that. And so when I got to the nursing home, I couldn't barely stand with a walker. And my wife said, you can come home when you can climb steps. And so I stayed in my room. I ate meals in my room. I didn't want to do anything. And about 2 weeks in, I was telling Ken, I got the walker and started walking down the hall. There was an elderly lady about 84, and I used to see her in the rehab room every day. And her head laid on her chest. She had had a massive stroke. She couldn't lift her head. She couldn't do anything. But she tried everything they wanted her to do. And I was walking by the cafeteria, and she had her head laying on the table. And she was pulling her food off of her plate, across the table, and feeding herself. And I sat there and I watched her eat about the whole meal. And I just looked up and said, thank you, Lord. You put me here for a reason. What do I have to complain about? I'm a young 72-year-old, and I can't do what this lady can do. I didn't have the courage she had at that time. And the support of my family, Ken visited, Isaac came to see me several times, and even then, just to uphold my reputation here, I could still talk. And so I could pour my heart out to a lot of people. And so I just came to the conclusion that what I believed as a child is true. That he's looking over me, he's the shepherd, and he has a plan when he's doing things. And I told my wife, I kind of pictured, when I started praying again in the hospital, I kind of pictured one of the archangels running in to the boss and going, do you know who's on the line down there? Which he probably replied, look, I know everything, so yeah, I know it is. And it carried me through everything, and it framed the reality that I always had as a child, which was, I pray the Lord my soul to take, if that's how it's going to be. And so I think that it just meant so much to me and my poor wife who went through everything. She deserves a Nobel Peace Medal. She got me through that. And I actually apologized to her that 6 months being my mother. And I'm thankful to this day for the support from my family and my friends. And 2 years cancer-free now, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. So that was all. Ken just asked me to share those feelings and the incident with the elderly lady, because I really believe that was the Lord saying, there are people worse off than you in this world. And that's, I'm sure he's still working on my request to make me 18 again, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. My oncologist told me his goal is to get me to 80, which I said to him last week, but that's only 5 years. What about if I make 80? And he went, you're on your own.